Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the financial planning podcast for parents who are senior level professionals with kids in school or college. If you're tired of stitching together 4 different specialists to run your financial life, you're in the right place. I'm Paul Fenner, certified financial planner, enrolled agent, and founder of Tama Capital. I also have 4 kids, including a set of triplets, so I know the pace. Let's get into today's conversation.
Hi, and welcome back. The ability to do what you want, when you want, for as long as you want, has an infinite ROI. This is a point that Morgan Housel has made, and one that I've been sitting with lately. Morgan also points out that the biggest single point of failure with money is a sole reliance on a paycheck to fund your short-term spending needs with no savings to create a gap between what you think your expenses are and what they might be. And one more point along these lines is that the most important part of every plan is planning on the plan not going according to plan. I've got a good story behind this one as well. But these 3 separate ideas, they're all really saying the same thing. And it took me a while to see it. And what Morgan is describing is a gap. The distance between what you earn and what you spend. Between your plan and what your life actually throws at you. Between the life you're building towards and the freedom to actually live it. Most of us aren't building that gap. We're actually filling it. So here's a story of a family I worked with last year. 2 professionals, they're in the mid-40s, combined incomes north of $250,000, so they were doing well. And they were doing everything they were supposed to do, maxing out retirement accounts, maxing out 529 accounts, sending kids to all the right activities, keeping up with the neighborhood. By every external measure, they looked like they had everything figured out. Then one of them lost their job. Not because of anything they did wrong. The company reorganized. Their role was eliminated. And within about 90 days, we were having a conversation with a very different kind of tone. Because there was no gap. Every dollar coming in was earmarked before it arrived. The paycheck wasn't funding a life. It was funding the appearance of one. And I've seen this more times than I can count. And to be honest with you, I've lived a version of it myself. When I left my corporate career, it wasn't because I had everything figured out. Far from it. It was pretty scary, actually. Teresa and I were sitting on a pile of uncertainty. But what we did have was a gap. Not a huge one, but enough that it made the choice ours to make. Enough that I could walk away from the predictability of a salary and build something that actually fit the life we wanted to live. And that gap didn't happen by accident. It was a result of years of asking a really uncomfortable question: what is actually enough for us? And some of those conversations got quite heated, believe me. But here's what I want people to think about when in regards to that question. Because when they hear enough and assume it means settling or scaling back or accepting less than what they wanted, that's not what this is about. It's not what it means. Enough is a definition. It's the answer to a question most people never actually sit down and ask. When you don't know what enough looks like, you can never stop reaching it. The goalpost keeps moving because you haven't planted it anywhere. And a goalpost that never stops moving is incredibly expensive. It costs money, obviously, but it also costs time, attention, and presence. So let's go back to that opening quote again from Morgan. The ability to do what you want, when you want, for as long as you want. That's freedom. It doesn't require an unlimited number. It requires a gap. The distance between what your life actually cost and what you have available. The biggest point of failure is a sole reliance on that paycheck. That's fragility. When the gap is zero, any disruption becomes a crisis, whether it's a job loss, medical issue, your furnace goes out, car breaks down. The gap is what absorbs that shock before it becomes a catastrophe. Planning on your plan, not going to plan. This one hits home for me because it was one of the first thoughts I had when Teresa and I found out we were having triplets. It took some humility to wrap my arms around this. A financial plan isn't a prediction. It's a framework. And it's always going to need adjusting. The gap is what gives you the flexibility to adjust without everything falling apart. All three come back to the same place. The gap is the thing, not the number in your count. The distance between what you've committed to and what you've actually need, that's it. But it's one of the hardest things I work through with families, because helping them to get honest about that distance is tough. Because for a lot of people, there's a version of what their life looks like financially, but when you look at it in reality, it's not the same. Good income, growing expenses equals no gap. And if that describes you, I want to be clear. Like I've said this over and over. I don't judge people here, but it does describe a lot of the families, especially busy ones with multiple careers, multiple kids, a schedule that doesn't leave any time for reflection. So it's so easy to just keep running. But if you never stop and ask what enough looks like, the answer is always going to be more. One thing that you can do this week, look at your monthly living expenses. Then look at how many months your liquid savings would cover those expenses if your income were to suddenly stop or change tomorrow. That number is your gap. That's your freedom score. And there's no magic number here. It isn't about hitting a specific target you've read somewhere. It's just about knowing the number. Because you can't have an honest conversation about enough until you know where you actually stand. That's it. Just one calculation. I keep coming back to this idea because I think it's one of the most practical things you can do in personal finance. And it has almost nothing to do with the market, your investment allocation, or interest rates. None of those things. None. It has to do with a gap. And that gap starts with a question. What is actually enough for us? And if you want to think through this with somebody, that's what I'm here for. This is the conversations that I have with the families I work with at TAMA. So you can find me here, show notes, tamacapital.com. And remember, money is a number, enough is a story. Make sure you're writing your own. That's all for this week. We'll see you next time.
Now for the fine print. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not personalized financial, tax, or legal advice. Before making any decisions about your specific situation, please work with a qualified professional. TAMA Capital is a registered investment advisor.